Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Next guest is somebody I'm definitely excited to have on, somebody I met on Twitter a very long time ago. He is a Fantasy Pros expert ranker. He was a Scott Fishbowl 10 finalist. He has a video that came out after the Super Bowl, a tweet making fun of Tyrann Mathieu that has gone viral, over 12 million views. And I'm talking about my guy, Elvin Ryan. Elvin, thank you for coming on, brother, and welcome to the show.
Dude, thanks for having me. I'm pumped.
I know definitely why you're pumped. The listeners know as well. We are doing our NFC South breakdown, and anybody who knows you, anybody who knows anything about you, knows that you're a Saints fan, season ticket holder. You talk about your Saints fandom often on Twitter. I'm looking at your background right here. People listening on to the podcast can't see it, but I see it. So Elvin, we're talking about your New Orleans Saints, and the Saints were 12-4 last year, 2020, winning their division, but ultimately losing in the NFC divisional round to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, division rivals. Drew Brees was definitely not his best that day and has since retired from the NFL. The Saints are usually a team that they're used to making these Super Bowl runs, kicking the can down the road in terms of a cap perspective. But now without Brees to kind of elevate the some of this talent around them, that could potentially catch up with them here. Elvin, like I mentioned, you're a season ticket holder. You're from the area of Louisiana. What are the expectations as it pertains to the Saints in the Big Easy?
I mean, in the Big Easy, we expect nothing less than what we've been given since Sean Payton and Drew Brees came to town in 2006. And I think probably about the last 3-4 years, this is a moment that Sean Payton has waited for, right? Like no one's going to force Drew Brees out, but we all saw him, he was fading. Just Father Time was catching up, and I think Sean Payton's extremely excited for this moment. I think whenever you see the 9 games that he played without Drew Brees in the last 2 seasons, Teddy Bridgewater, Taysom Hill, 7-2. So and Sean Payton we trust. I think that's the bottom line. I think the talent is still there. We didn't lose much. Salary cap kind of seems like a lie, right? We were even able to franchise tag Marcus Williams. A lot of people thought that he was going to get away from us. Outside of Emmanuel Sanders, we're pretty intact.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you had made about the Saints, and that's one that I had been thinking about, right? The Saints under Drew Brees, you mentioned that they were 7-2 without, or Saints under Sean Payton, that they were 7-2 without Drew Brees. I think that's a number that's doesn't happen by accident. In talking to some of the your I guess your peers that happen to be division rivals, fans of division rivals of the Saints. They're not big believers in the Saints this year, and I would understand why. But they kind of got me thinking, do you think there's anything to the point where, the team is like, okay, Drew's only out for 4 or 5 games, like we can hold this down until he gets back. And do you think that there's anything to the point that they're going to go into the season and Drew's not coming back? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, it's definitely a point that's been brought up. I know that Vegas only has us at a 7-10 record, which I think it's flipped. I think it's more like a 10-7 record. And I would say probably in the last 4 or 5 years, where the Saints struggle is starting off the season, right? I mean, we've had 0-2 starts. We've even had a pair of 0-4 starts. It's a place where we struggle. And now you're looking at the beginning of this schedule, and it doesn't matter who's at quarterback. You get Green Bay, and maybe they don't have Aaron Rodgers, right? If they don't have Aaron Rodgers, that's a W, regardless who's under center. You go to Carolina, Sam Darnold over there, that's a winnable game. New England, New York, Washington, and then you're heading into your bye week. So really, this is probably our easiest first 5 games that the Saints have had in about 5-6 years. So regardless of who the quarterback is at that point, you go into your bye week 5-0, you're feeling some kind of way whenever you come out in week 7, Monday Night Football. I mean, you've got the swagger. You're excited. You're pumped up. I mean, at that point, you're one of the best teams in the league at 5-0, probably one of the few undefeated teams. And I think Drew's in the past at that point. Like, if they go in and they lose to the Packers, it is Aaron Rodgers. Somehow Darnold goes off on them, Cam Newton, and we start losing those winnable games, then I could see this snowballing out of hand. But those are 5 very winnable games heading into the bye. And if that mojo gets going, Sean Payton's ego starts getting stroking, like, this is going to be a dangerous team, regardless of who's under center.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point with Sean Payton, man. It's definitely one coach that you could kind of feel his energy and his momentum through his coaching. So, you referenced the quarterback position a ton, and obviously it's the most important position in football, probably the most important position in sports, and so it's going to get all the attention here. And so Drew Brees in 2020 missed 4 games, and those were 4 starts that we saw Taysom Hill. 4 games where we saw Taysom Hill be the starter. And between weeks 10 and 13, he ended up being the quarterback 9 during that time, averaging 21.1 fantasy points per game. He was a weapon on the ground, rushing for nearly 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in those 4 games. 50 yards and a touchdown per game there, completed 72% of his passes for 834 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So he was pretty productive during that stretch. Then there's Jameis Winston, who's obviously, he was the guy that came in relief actually for Drew Brees after the initial injury. But again, it was Hill that would start. Jameis's last time as a full-time starter was the notorious 30 for 30 season. These guys are, going close in price, so it seems like a toss-up as to who people believe will be the starter for the Saints. Jameis going off the board as the quarterback 27. Taysom Hill going off the board as a quarterback 31, rounds 4 and 14 respectively in one quarterback 12-team leagues. Elvin, which of these guys are you going after?
I'm in the Scott Fishbowl right now, like you had stated earlier. Jameis is going in about the 8th to 10th round. I asked everyone on Twitter, like, to let me know where these guys are going. It's something that I wanted to know. And it seems like Taysom's going 11th round or undrafted to this point so far. I mean, no one's gotten back with me with sooner than 11th, or really not many responses with Taysom. So I don't think he's being drafted in many leagues. Yeah, I know Scott Fishbowl's a little slower. I'm going with Taysom for the value, and I think he's someone. Sean Payton's in love with him, and I think that's what it boils down to. Maybe Jameis's vision is fixed. Maybe that's what it was in Tampa, and we'll never know unless Jameis gets that start this year. I definitely think that he has some decision-making issues, or he had them. I know he did an interview on ESPN a few months back, and he talked about like how Drew was able to teach him that, hey man, it's not about getting the touchdown, it's about getting the first down, and like walking him through that. Like it's better to kick the field goal than throw the interception. And it seemed like in Jameis's voice that he grasped that. I think this is a quarterback battle that goes to the last game of the preseason. It's not going to be settled in camp. It might not be settled early in the season. I tweeted probably 6 months ago at the end of the season that I think if Jameis wins the job, it'll be Jameis and Taysom. If Taysom wins the job, it'll be Taysom's. It'll be a lot like what we saw in the 4-game relief of Drew Brees whenever he was out for injury. I think Sean Payton's almost obsessed with Taysom, and he likes having that gadget guy. He's never had that, but he had to play against Cam Newton all those years, and he saw the damage that someone with that skill set can do. A lot of people overlook Taysom's arm, but you cited the 72% completion. That's the highest completion percentage of anyone in their first 150 attempts. That's any quarterback ever. Second most is Russell Wilson, to put that on the scale for you. So he's more than that. He progressed throughout his 4 games. We saw him go from checking it down to Kamara, who's essentially his best player, right? He checked it down to him no times, 4 times, 8 times, 10 times. So that increased drastically. No one wants to remember the 10 target or the 8 target game. Everyone wants to remember the 0 and the 4. But it seemed like he learned from those first 2 starts where he was just tucking it and running, panicking and whatnot. And then we've seen Jameis in college at Florida State. I mean, there's not many out there with the just arm talent that Jameis Winston has. So to me, it's not about talent for the Saints at the quarterback position. It's more decision. And I think Sean Payton needs to find his guy and stick with him. If we find ourselves in this thing where Jameis is getting benched at halftime for Taysom, or Taysom's getting benched at halftime for Jameis, it could end up in one of those snowball effects that I talked about earlier, because you take away these guys' confidence, and that's a huge part of the game. So,
yeah, it's that point about Jameis and the arm talent. I think that there is something to the dynamic between Sean Payton and Taysom Hill, right? Because we saw Jameis go in initially in the game, right? He was the backup. And who knows, maybe it could have been because you spend all week with Taysom Hill game planning him for other things, and that you don't want to put too much on his plate, that you'd rather Jameis be the emergency backup quarterback, and then you implement Jameis or Taysom Hill the next week, because there's this trust here. I think there's this factor of trust where Sean Payton is not only obsessed with Taysom Hill, but he trusts Taysom Hill. And so I think that Jameis is going to get a chance because he has that arm talent that you had talked about. He's going to get that chance. And he's going to, because if he can put it together, he's the quarterback, right? It's just that's the problem. I mean, I'm coming from this is coming from somebody. I was a huge fan of Jameis when he was coming out of Florida State. But one of the things the people had talked about was, oh, this guy's a football savant. He'd been compared to Peyton Manning at times before mentally. But then it's just the decision making, right? The guy that takes too much risk. He's always trying to make the big play. And he's capable of making those big plays, but are you capable of making the check down when you have to? And if he learned that, I think he will be the guy. But if Sean Payton feels like he can't trust Jameis Winston, then it's going to be Taysom Hill.
well, see, and you brought up another point. So, Sean Payton loves what Taysom can do, right? And you think Jameis is going to get the shot. And I don't put it past either one to win this gig. I've thought about what if Sean wants to keep Taysom in this role that he's so good at, the Swiss Army knife, and they can use both of them. And the thing is, Jameis is more athletic physically than Drew Brees was at 40 years old. So you put Jameis in the slot whenever Taysom's in. Now they actually have to treat that like an actual receiver. Drew Brees, they weren't even covering him half the time. They were coming up to cover the read option with Taysom. You've got to respect Jameis on the outside if Taysom's there in that situation. That offense could be extremely unique if those two end up together like that.
Yeah, and I don't want this to come off as if I'm someone who doesn't believe in Taysom Hill, because I don't people don't like Taysom Hill because he doesn't do it the way it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't look the way it's supposed to when Taysom Hill does it, but he still gets it done, right? And I'm if Taysom Hill, I'm kind of with you, right? I kind of prefer Taysom Hill at his price because he's cheaper, and it's kind of similar to last year where he was cheaper when Drew Brees got hurt, and he ended up being the guy, and that same probability still stands here, and he's still cheaper. So if I had to take one, it'd probably be Taysom. But let's move on to a guy you referenced before, and that's Alvin Kamara, man. Super Camario, um, coming off his best season, the best season of his career high in rushing yards and receptions. Unfortunately, it wasn't 81, but was a career high. Yards from scrimmage was also a career high with 1,688 yards. Also a career high in touchdowns with 21 total touchdowns. Now, like you mentioned, there was some concern with the Taysom Hill starts. That if Taysom Hill does start, that we'll see similar usage that we saw last year in those four starts where he was on a 16 game pace, so 64 targets. Um, Far from the Alvin Kamara that we're used to. The thought is that if Winston is the starter, that we'll still see this usage out of Kamara in the pass game. He was the RB1 in total fantasy points per game, or in total fantasy points at 20 in 2020, even giving managers a 6 touchdown performance in Week 16 championship week. Going off the board right now, Elvin, as the RB4 according to 444.com's aggregated or multi-site ADP. How are you feeling about Kamara going in the drafts this year?
I feel good about him. I do think that regression will happen with touchdowns, but I don't think it's as much as people think. 21 touchdowns is hard to replicate for anyone, right? That's about as hard as Derrick Henry replicating the 2,000-yard seasons back to back on the ground. Um, I'm feeling somewhere around the 17, 18 touchdown. I don't, with the added game, so maybe it's not as big of a deal as if it was in 16 games, but I think he averages maybe a little over a touchdown a game. He's going to have those games like he had on Christmas Day against the Vikings whenever he scored the 6 touchdowns to tie that record. Like I said earlier, I'm not extremely worried about him with Taysom because I think Taysom learned and he realized, right? So the first 2 games, he just peppered Mike Thomas. He was even asked about it. He said, I look for 13. And then I think as the game started coming to him, you started seeing guys like Trotman, Kamara getting more involved, up to 10 targets in his fourth game. I'm not extremely worried about him. And then with Jameis, maybe I'm even a little bit more worried because you can't really name a pass catching back who succeeded with Jameis Winston. He's not a check down guy. We talked about his arm talent. Uh, he's looking for he was looking for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I mean, that was his game. I remember, it was a game where OJ Howard ran more routes in the week than any other tight end in the league, and he wasn't targeted once. Neither was Ronald Jones, and so that shows you all you needed to know right there. Like he's not looking for that game. That's not his game. He wants his guy. He wanted the touchdown. Maybe he changed. Maybe Drew Brees really did coach him up. I told you I bought into that video, but I'm just as worried with Jameis as Taysom. I think at the end of the day, we talked about Sean Payton earlier. At the end of the day, it's his team. It's going to be his offense, and if these guys can't run it the way that he wants it to be run, then it's going to be the other guy. He knows that Kamara is his best player. He's going to ensure that Kamara is involved. That's why I'm taking Kamara between RB1 and RB3.
Yeah, I'm personally just a little bit down on Kamara. Maybe I shouldn't be. I have him as my RB6 right now in PPR leagues. Um, Actually, he might be 7. He's definitely 7 after Austin Eckler. Yeah, it's definitely been a fall from grace for me personally, but like you're saying, maybe we should be less inclined because I think the thing is that Latavius Murray still exists, and so this backfield won't go entirely to Alvin Kamara, and especially we've seen the injuries that he suffered when they do lean on him, so that's more incentive for them to really share that workload. Um, and then if Taysom Hill is the starter, then those are rushing opportunities that are even taken away, siphoned away from Alvin Kamara, and even some potential touchdown opportunities as well. So there's just this kind of double edged sword here. Um, but let's move on to the wide receiver position, Elvin. Um, Michael Thomas, you talked about him before. Taysom said he looks for 13. I'm pretty sure whoever's back there is going to look for 13 because that's usually what we see from this Drew Brees less offense. But Michael Thomas was the wide receiver 1 in 2019, Many thought he would be the wide receiver one in 2020, and he was drafted as such. I was not one of those people. I had Devontae Adams. I just want to put that out there. But finished as the wide receiver 41 in fantasy points per game with just 12 points. He played in only 7 games as he dealt with injuries for most of the year. Going off the board, Elvin, as the wide receiver 9 in redraft leagues. How do you feel about this price tag?
And I think it's a discount. It's not saying that that's not where he should be priced, but I'm almost certain he finishes higher than that just because of volume and positive regression at touchdown. How many touchdowns did he have last year? 0, right? So he's 100% guaranteed positive regression whenever it comes to touchdowns. I don't see you holding one of the best receivers in the league out of the end zone 2 seasons in a row, right? 100 targets seems easy for him at this point. I mean, 120 to 150 seems more realistic. Maybe more. It just seems so easy with the added game. Who knows? I honestly, I think he becomes the most targeted receiver in the NFL this season, regardless of who's at under center. Jameis Winston loves his names, the big names. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, he didn't even look anyone else's way, right? Tyler Johnson and those guys. And then Taysom already said, like, I'm looking for 13. He will probably have the highest, I would say, volume share percentage of any team. If he leads the league, I think he'll definitely be top 5. I definitely think he has a chance at that. And then whenever you know the statistic of his catch percentage is that of like a Chris Paul at the free throw line, right? So whenever a guy like that's getting that many targets, they're not going to be Drew Brees targets, of course. They're going to be Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill targets, which shouldn't be spoken in the same sentence, but he's going to have a lot of passes, man. I'm excited about him. I would take him right over around like DK. I think he's the wide receiver 5. He's a guarantee at wide receiver 9 where he's at, though.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you're saying, man. Michael Thomas is, people, we've really suffered from recency bias as a fantasy community. A guy does great and we'll build him up. We'll draft him as the number 1 wide receiver, but then the moment that he, has a bad year, and for multitude of reasons, right? And I think we have to understand a lot of times, we think a guy had a bad year, but it's really just bad luck, right? Because did he have a bad game out the gate? Yes. But then he gets hurt, right? And then comes back, gets hurt again. And then you just kind of have this bad taste, has a bad game in the playoffs. And so then all of this stuff just kind of reverberates with you throughout an off season. And then you're just sitting here thinking about it. You're just sitting here thinking about it as you enter in 2021 and you start having trepidations about drafting a particular player. But there should be no trepidations for drafting Michael Thomas because the same reasons that we were drafting him in 2020, this were the same reasons why he finished as a wide receiver 1 in 2019, and were the same reasons why are the same things we should expect from him in 2021, which is what you talked about, the targets. He very well could lead the league in targets. He'll definitely be in the conversation, being in the top 5 in that category probably. Having upwards of anywhere between a 25 to 30% target share. And I think that's definitely possible. And like you said, the catch rate, it's not coming from Drew Brees, but he's still pretty good at what he does. And so, I think when you're talking about a guy that has 150 to 160, 70, 80 target potential, that's a guy that should be on your radar. And wide receiver 9, sign me up.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And the thing is, look, I don't think anyone was more frustrated than Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas has always been a good locker room guy. You start hearing about Michael Thomas fighting Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, he's frustrated with how his season's going, how his luck has turned, his health. 2021, people better watch out. DBs better be on alert.
Yeah, man, definitely. All right, Elvin. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Got a few more questions for you, but let's talk about this wide receiver 2 on the team. Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway. I wrote down Callaway because he's a little bit of I got a little bit of a man crush on him. But they're the next 2 returning target getters after Kamara and Michael Thomas. Smith is he seemed like a tease. He had a career high in targets last year and yards, but you know, not by much, turning 50 targets into 34 catches for 448 yards, 4 touchdowns. Callaway was a rookie, but was kind of productive when you look at the amount of opportunity that he was given. 27 targets, 20 turned into 21 receptions, 213 yards. Did not find the end zone, but Smith is being drafted as the wide receiver 2, going off the board as wide receiver 77. Callaway doesn't have an ADP at all, according to 4for4. But how are you feeling about either of these two guys?
Yeah. So I wasn't even sure if many people knew about him, but that's my guy. That's our wide receiver too. His name's Marquez Callaway. He's a sophomore in the league from Tennessee, where he had a great average depth of target. Right, that his ADAT score at Tennessee was something that will mesh well if it's Jameis Winston. If Jameis Winston is the quarterback, and then we got to see him a little bit with Taysom Hill, and we got to see how physical he is. So you said how he stayed out of the end zone. Unfortunately, that happened to quite a few of the Saints receivers. Don't expect that again, right? So positive regression due in this case as well. And then you got to see how physical he was. Most of the routes he ran were hitches or out routes. Okay, where he was having to grab the ball from defenders. Like those aren't easy plays whenever you're going against NFL corners, right? So you got to see how physical he is, how strong his hands are. Like he's a guy who showed me enough. And then on the other hand, you got Traquan Smith, where you've had Devontae Parker and Corey Davis. But other than that, I mean, there's not many breakouts that late, right? It's almost like, hey, you had your shot. Thanks for everything. I don't see a situation where the Saints pick up his option after the season, and it'll be the Marquez Callaway show.
Yeah, Traquan Smith was a 3rd-round pick, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even when we talk about guys, these 5th-year breakouts in Parker and Corey Davis, these are 1st-round picks that we're talking about, right? So these are uberly talented guys that are given an extra long leash for one reason or another. Parker and Davis both dealt with their share of injuries, but Traquan Smith has just been, he's been a good prospect, but I think that's really all he's been since coming into the league. He's been nothing more than just a prospect. And so, like you said, when I look at a guy like him who hasn't produced that to this point, and I see Callaway and he gets opportunity right away and he's producing, that's the guy to me that has the higher trajectory, because I've seen more in less time from him than I've seen from Traquan Smith. So I'm with you. Callaway's the guy, and I'm glad that it's not just me. Something that I noticed. I'm glad
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
bringing the Saints.
I'm definitely with you. Yeah. And then with Traquan, one of the things that burns me up the most, I would say, is everyone talks about how great he's going to be with Jameis because Jameis has the big arm, which Jameis has a bigger arm than Drew Brees could ever dream of having, right? But since 2016, and that's including last year and the second half of the season before, whenever the cliff really started coming, right? The last year and a half, Drew Brees still is second since 2016 in completions over 20 yards, only to Patrick Mahomes. So you can't tell me that he never had the shot, right? So you're making excuses for him. I just don't see a breakout coming.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we're on the same page there. Let's see if we're on the same page about this next guy. And we're talking about the tight end position. So obviously that means Adam Troutman, the 2nd-year player, is expected to step into an opportunity here with the Saints to be the starter at a position that historically in this scheme with this coaching staff has been utilized in this offense. The former 3rd-round pick was a personal favorite of mine. I'm excited to see what he can do in a full-time role. Going off the board is the tight end 20, Elvin. Do you think Troutman has value at his current ADP?
Yeah, I think he's being drafted at his absolute floor, right? Like just based on volume alone, because outside of Annette, he's the only tight end on the roster who's probably going to catch a pass this season, right? So I think he's being drafted as absolute floor based on volume, and the guy has a ceiling with the target share of Jarrett Cook and Josh Hill, who left for Los Angeles and Detroit. The guy can easily come in and have a 60 reception, 700-yard, 9, 10 touchdowns. And then you're looking at him with 11 points per game, which, hey, it's not great. The tight end position's never been that great once you fall outside of that top four. But you give him 11 points per game, he's got to be somewhere around tight end 7.
11 points per game would have made him the tight end 9 or tied with the tight end 8. Well, no, it would have tied 6, 7, and 8 with Logan Thomas, Robert Tonyan, and TJ
So yeah,
Hawkinson.
I could see that. So exactly. So Tonyan is who I would compare him to almost in a sense, but more athletic. I think his breakout season will resemble a lot of Tonyan's breakout season, where it was a high yield for touchdowns. I think that's something that he gets, but I still see this guy going 60 for 700 in the 17-game season.
Yeah, I think that's definitely in the range of outcomes for Adam Troutman. I mean, I looked at this guy. He just seemed like a very smooth receiver. At was it Dayton, University of Dayton? I knew I'd remember. Yeah, he just seemed like a very smooth receiver. Somebody he's big too. I think 6'5", 6'6". Again, very smooth. So I really like him as a prospect, and then to see him go to the Saints with Sean Payton, knowing what he's done with tight ends, I think that's what's really got me excited here about Troutman. So yeah, I agree. Tight end 20's got to be the floor here. There can't be any way he finishes outside or the top 12. So yeah, I definitely am on board with this take, Elvin. But one last question, man. I got to get this one out of you, brother. The NFC South, who's winning the division? Where are the Saints finishing? How's it breaking down?
I think Tampa will win it this season. I said that I think we go 10-7. I think we have a rough patch in the middle of our schedule where we lose a handful of games, but I think coming playoffs it's going to be reversed this year, where Tampa might end up sweeping us in the regular season, but Sean Payton gets them in the postseason. So I that's where I'm leaning right now. Second in the division, 10-7, beating Tampa in the playoffs.
Yeah, I kind of have it. I have it in a similar way. I've got Tampa Bay. I mean, I don't have the playoffs predicted, but I do have Tampa Bay winning the division. I've got the Saints second, Carolina third, and then the Falcons finishing fourth. Um, But Elvin, man, this was awesome, brother. This was a lot of fun, man. And I'm glad that we got to sit down and talk about your New Orleans Saints. So why don't you let everybody know where they can find you, what you're working on these days, and what you got cooking, man.
Yeah, man. Just you can find me on Twitter, Elvin Ryan _FF. If you aren't following there, go ahead and hit that follow button. Other than that, I've actually paused my Patreon. I got a lot of things going on in life, but I have a really cool Patreon fantasy feeds where I give fantasy advice and the money goes to feeding America. There's too many starving people out there, and it's something that I feel like I can do to be a little bit of the change I want to see in the world. So Fantasy Feeds is the Patreon name. I'll let you know when it's back up.
Well, that's awesome stuff there, Elvin, man. So if you're not checking Elvin out on Twitter, make sure you go check him out, and make sure as soon as he gets that Patreon page up, you go check that out too, because that's definitely a great cause. And Scott Fishbowl is going on, so everybody's in the spirit of giving. So let's extend that some more. Elvin, man, again, definitely appreciate you, brother. Everybody, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch y'all later. Peace.